My daughter's fiancé told me we only want important people at our wedding. I hung up the phone, said nothing, and made a few quiet calls. By sunrise, 13 vendor contracts were canceled, 5 credit cards were declined, and the $500,000 wedding had vanished into thin air. Before I tell you how I destroyed my own daughter's big day, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone who actually pays the bills. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night in Chicago. The radiator in my small 3-bedroom house was clanking, fighting against the October chill. I was standing at the ironing board in the kitchen, carefully pressing the steam button on a navy blue suit I had bought at Men's Warehouse in 1995. It was a little tight around the shoulders now, and the fabric had that shiny look that cheap polyester gets after 3 decades, but it was clean. It was respectful. It was the suit I had worn to bury my wife, and it was the suit I intended to wear to walk my only daughter, Sarah, down the aisle at the Grand Monarch Hotel. I am Bernard Kowalski, 73 years old. To my neighbors, I am just Bernie, the retired logistics manager who drives a dented 2010 Ford F-150 and spends too much time fishing. They see me mowing my own lawn and fixing my own gutters. What they do not see, what nobody sees, is the bank account attached to the holding company I sold 5 years ago. When I exited the logistics game, I walked away with $120 million in liquid assets. I kept it quiet. I wanted a simple life. I wanted my daughter to love me for me, not for my checkbook. I hung the suit on the kitchen cabinet knob and stepped back to admire it. That is when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with the name Jason, my future son-in-law. I picked it up on the second ring. I expected last-minute nerves. Maybe he needed advice on his tie. Maybe he just wanted to say thank you for raising the woman he was about to marry. "Bernie, listen," Jason said. There was no hello, no greeting. His voice was tight the way it sounded when he was pitching his tech startup ideas to investors he was trying to hustle. "I am here, Jason," I said. "Is everything okay with Sarah?" "Everything is fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Look, Bernie, we have been going over the guest list and the seating charts for tomorrow. We have a situation with the optics." Optics. That was Jason's favorite word. He was 30 years old, the CEO of a company that had never made $1 of profit, but he talked about optics as if he were running for president. "What kind of optics?" I asked. He sighed, a loud, impatient sound that crackled through the speaker. "We have a lot of high-profile guests coming tomorrow, Bernie. Senator Miller is flying in. We have the venture capital guys from Silicon Valley. These are people who can make or break my future. We are trying to curate a specific image of success and modern elegance." I waited. My hand gripped the edge of the ironing board. The metal felt cold under my fingers. So Jason continued, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative. "We think it is best if you sit this one out. The ceremony, I mean." I froze. The steam from the iron hissed in the silence. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low. "Don't make this difficult, Bernie," Jason snapped. "Look at it from my perspective. You show up in that old suit of yours with your rough hands and your truck. It doesn't fit the narrative. We only want important people at the main event. People who add value to the network." Important people. The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused. They were scarred from 40 years of loading crates and fixing engines. They were the hands that had built the empire that was secretly funding his entire lifestyle. "I see," I said. "I am not an important person." "Not in that room, no," Jason said, sounding relieved that I wasn't yelling. "But hey, we aren't banning you completely. You can come to the reception after 10 o'clock. The staff entrance around the back will be open. We can get you a plate of food in the back, and you can say hello to Sarah when the VIPs leave." It is a win-win. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was the feeling of a heavy door slamming shut and locking forever. "Does Sarah know about this?" I asked. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds that told me everything I needed to know. "She is in the bathroom crying right now," Jason said, his voice dismissive. "She is emotional, but she knows what is best for our future. She agrees that we need to prioritize the business connections. Don't call her tonight, Bernie. You will just upset her. Just do the right thing and stay home until 10 tomorrow." He didn't wait for an answer. He hung up. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time. The silence of the house was absolute. I looked at the suit hanging on the cabinet. The suit I had ironed with such care. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was cheap. It was old. It was honest. Jason Sterling thought he was speaking to Bernie, the retiree. He thought he was speaking to a man who lived on Social Security and coupons. He had no idea he had just insulted the silent owner of BK Holdings, the very entity that was listed as the angel sponsor for his entire wedding. I did not scream. I did not throw the iron against the wall. I did not call my daughter to beg for my place. I walked over to the cabinet and poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey. It was a cheap brand, the kind that burns on the way down. I drank it in one swallow. Then I picked up my phone again. I scrolled past Sarah's name. I scrolled past my sister's name. I stopped at a contact simply labeled Mitch. Mitchell O'Connor was my lawyer, my fixer, and the only man in Chicago who knew exactly how much money I had and where every cent of it was buried. It was 9:15 on a Friday night, but Mitch picked up on the first ring. Boss Mitch said, "Everything good for tomorrow, no?" "Mitch," I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. "Change of plans." "What do you need?" Mitch asked, his tone instantly shifting from casual to combat ready. "I need you to execute Option 0, I said. There was a pause on the line. Option 0 was a nuclear code we had established years ago. It meant total liquidation. It meant cutting every financial tether I had to a specific target. It meant scorching the earth. Bernie, Mitch said cautiously. Option 0 is irreversible. We are talking about Sarah's wedding. We are talking about the housing trust, the startup capital, everything. I looked at the navy blue suit one last time. I thought about Sarah crying in the bathroom and doing nothing to stop him. I thought about the phrase important people. They want important people, Mitch, I said. So let's show them what an important person actually looks like. Cut it. Cut it all. I want the credit lines frozen by midnight. I want the venue contract voided. I want the investment capital pulled from his company. Understood, Mitch said. I will start the calls now. It is going to be a bloodbath, Bernie. Good, I said. I hung up the phone. I took the navy blue suit off the cabinet knob. I didn't throw it away. I folded it carefully and put it back in the closet. I wouldn't be needing it tomorrow. I was not going to a wedding. I was going to a war. I went to the refrigerator and made myself a ham sandwich. I ate it standing over the sink. Then I went to bed and slept like a baby. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my eyes snapped open. The sun was just starting to rise over the Chicago skyline. 20 miles away at the Grand Monarch Hotel, the nightmare was just beginning for Jason Sterling. I made a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table. I opened my iPad and logged into the secure portal of BK Holdings. Mitch had been busy. The screen showed a series of red notifications. Transaction declined Grand Monarch Catering. Amount $75,000. Transaction declined Lux Floral Designs. Amount $30,000. Account frozen Sterling Startup Capital Fund. Status recall notice sent. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter. My phone began to ring. It was Jason. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Then Sarah called. Then Jason again. Then a number I didn't recognize, probably the hotel manager. I sat there for an hour watching the missed calls pile up like snow against a drift. I imagined the scene in the presidential suite. The credit card being declined at the front desk. The florists packing up their roses. The chef stopping the prep cooks from slicing the lobster. They wanted a wedding for important people. But they forgot the most important rule of business: you do not bite the hand that feeds you, especially when you don't even know whose hand it is. At 8 o'clock, I finally stood up. I went to the closet, but I didn't reach for a suit. I put on my fishing gear. A faded green vest with pockets for lures, a pair of cargo pants stained with oil, and a baseball cap that said Chicago Cubs. I grabbed my keys. Not the keys to a limousine, but the keys to my Ford F-150. I was going to the hotel. Not to the back door. Not after 10 o'clock. I was going right to the front entrance, and I was going to look exactly like the nobody they thought I was. The drive to the city was smooth. I listened to the oldies station. The morning air was crisp. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the Grand Monarch, the chaos was already visible from the street. There were trucks parked haphazardly. Vendors were arguing. Security guards were waving their arms. And right in the center of the storm, standing on the curb, in a silk robe looking like he was about to have a heart attack, was Jason. He was screaming at a man in a tuxedo who held a clipboard. Sarah was standing a few feet away, her face buried in her hands. I rolled down my window as I idled the truck next to a Rolls-Royce. The engine of my old Ford rumbled loudly, cutting through the shouting. Jason spun around, his eyes locked onto me. For a second, he looked confused. Then his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He marched toward my truck, his bare feet slapping against the pavement. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking toward the edge of a cliff. And I was the one who had removed the safety rail. "Get out of here," Jason hissed, grabbing the door handle of my truck. "I told you not to come. You are ruining everything." I put the truck in park. I turned off the engine. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am not here for the wedding, Jason," I said calmly. "I am just here to pick up my refund." The look on his face told me the game was truly on, and I was just getting started. To understand the sheer magnitude of the panic that was unfolding inside the presidential suite of the Grand Monarch, you have to understand the lie I had let Jason believe for the last 6 months. When he proposed to Sarah, he didn't come to me for a blessing. He came to me with a pitch deck. He sat at my kitchen table, ignored the coffee I poured him, and explained that their wedding wasn't just a union of souls. It was a brand activation event. He talked about synergy and networking. He told me he needed a high 6-figure budget to attract the kind of investors who would launch his tech company into the stratosphere. He didn't ask me for money directly because he looked at my worn-out furniture and assumed I didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. He said he was looking for an angel investor to sponsor the event in exchange for equity in his future success. So I gave him one. I created a shell company called BK Holdings. I set up a sleek website, a virtual office in Delaware, and a dedicated phone line that routed directly to a voicemail I controlled. Through my lawyer, Mitch, I became his angel sponsor. I approved every ridiculous expense. The imported orchids from Thailand, the 12-piece orchestra, the vintage champagne that cost $400 a bottle. I let him run up a bill of exactly $500,000 on a corporate black card issued by BK Holdings. I wanted to see if there was a limit to his greed. There wasn't. At 6 o'clock that morning, while I was sipping my coffee in my kitchen, the bill came due. Inside the presidential suite, Jason was likely dreaming of his future millions. He was sleeping in sheets that cost more than my entire wardrobe. But the wake-up call didn't come from an alarm clock. It came from a heavy, authoritative knock on the mahogany double doors. It was Henri Laurent, the general manager of the Grand Monarch. He was a man who had seen everything in the hospitality industry, but he had never seen a credit limit disappear as fast as the one Mitch had just obliterated. He didn't come alone. He brought the head of security and a portable credit card terminal. Jason opened the door in his silk robe, likely annoyed at being disturbed before his scheduled massage. I can only imagine the confusion on his face when Laurent didn't bow or offer him a complimentary fruit basket. Laurent walked straight into the room, ignoring the panoramic view of the city, and laid a single piece of paper on the glass coffee table. "Mr. Sterling," Laurent said, his voice ice-cold. "We have a problem with the master account." Jason laughed. He actually laughed. He told Laurent to run the card again. He said there must be a glitch in their system because the angel sponsor had unlimited liquidity. He picked up the heavy metal black card from the nightstand and tossed it onto the table like it was a royal decree. "Run it again," Jason commanded, "and bring me an espresso." Laurent didn't move. He explained that they had run the card 5 times in the last 10 minutes. Each time the response from the bank was the same. "Account closed. Fraud alert. Do not honor." The color drained from Jason's face. He grabbed the card and stared at it as if it had betrayed him. He didn't understand that the plastic in his hand was now worth less than a library card. Then came the ultimatum. Laurent explained the reality of the situation with brutal efficiency. The hotel had a strict policy regarding high-value events. Payment was required in full before the vendors began setup. The contract Jason had signed, the one he hadn't bothered to read because he was too busy admiring his own signature, stated that if the primary funding source failed on the day of the event, the client had 60 minutes to provide an alternative method of payment or immediate eviction would follow. $500,000. 1 hour. The clock started ticking. Jason scrambled for his phone. His fingers were shaking so hard, he dropped it twice before he could dial. He called the number on the back of the BK Holdings business card. He put it on speakerphone, desperate to show Laurent that this was all a terrible mistake. He expected a receptionist. He expected an apology. What he got was a mechanical operator voice, the kind you hear when a number has been disconnected. The digital ghost I had created had vanished into the ether. He called again and again. Silence. Panic set in. Real suffocating panic. Sarah woke up coming out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes, asking why there were security guards in their suite. Jason ignored her. He was frantically scrolling through his contacts, looking for a lifeline. He called the only people he thought had money. His parents. Richard and Cynthia Sterling. I knew Richard and Cynthia. They were the kind of people who leased luxury cars they couldn't afford to drive to country clubs they couldn't afford to join. They lived in a house that had been refinanced 3 times. They wore designer clothes with the tags tucked in so they could return them on Monday. To Jason, they were titans of industry. To me, they were financial hallucinations. Jason screamed into the phone. "Dad, the card isn't working. The sponsor's line is dead. I need you to cover the bill. Just write a check, and we will sort it out on Monday." I wasn't in the room, but I know exactly what happened next because Mitch had run a credit check on Richard Sterling 2 days ago. Richard didn't have $500,000. Richard didn't have $5,000. On the other end of the line, Richard stammered. He made excuses about liquidity and offshore transfers taking time to clear. He talked about assets being tied up in real estate. He used a lot of big financial words to say a very simple thing: he was broke. Jason threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the wall, a fitting symbol for his fracturing life. Laurent checked his watch. 30 minutes had passed. The dismantling began immediately. It was a masterclass in efficiency. Laurent picked up his radio and spoke a single code word. Down in the grand ballroom, the florists stopped arranging the centerpiece. Thousands of white hydrangeas and imported lilies, which had just been unloaded from refrigerated trucks, were loaded back up. The head florist didn't argue. She had a strict contract: no payment, no flowers. The room, which was supposed to look like a botanical garden, was stripped bare in 20 minutes. In the kitchens, the executive chef turned off the ovens. He instructed his sous chefs to stop prepping the filet mignon and the lobster tails. The expensive ingredients were packed into coolers and wheeled back into the walk-in freezer. The staff meal that day would be sandwiches, not the 5-course tasting menu Jason had designed to impress the senator. The stage where the 12-piece orchestra was setting up their instruments went silent. The band leader received a text message, packed up his saxophone, and led his musicians out the loading dock. They were union. They didn't play for free. Up in the suite, Sarah was sobbing. She was begging Jason to do something. She asked him to call me. "Don't call him," Jason snapped at her. "What is Bernie going to do? He drives a truck. He can't fix this. We need real money." He was still delusional. He still believed that his status, his connections, his important people would save him. He started calling his friends, his fraternity brothers, his so-called business partners. He asked for loans. He asked for favors. He asked for miracles. But nobody lends $500,000 at 7 in the morning on a Saturday to a man who sounds like he is having a nervous breakdown. One by one, they hung up. One by one, the excuses came. At 7:55, Laurent knocked on the door again. The hour was up. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply informed Jason that his key cards had been deactivated. He told them that security would escort them to the lobby to settle the incidental charges, the room service, champagne, the spa treatments, the dry cleaning, before they were removed from the property. Jason tried to bluff. He puffed out his chest. He threatened to sue. He screamed that he had a senator coming in 2 hours. He yelled that he was an important man and that this hotel would regret the day they crossed him. Laurent looked at him with the weary expression of a man who dealt with important people every day. "Mr. Sterling," Laurent said, "the senator called 10 minutes ago to cancel his RSVP. It seems word travels fast. Now please pack your bags." The wedding of the century was over before the first guest had even arrived. The facade was stripped away, leaving nothing but 2 panicked children in a room they couldn't pay for. And I was parked in the driveway, watching the revolving doors, waiting for the show to spill out onto the street. The first phase of Option Zero was complete. The money was gone. The status was gone. Now it was time for the humiliation. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the driveway of the Grand Monarch Hotel looked less like a venue for a society wedding and more like a crime scene investigation. The revolving brass doors, usually spinning with the rhythm of bellhops and high-end luggage, were motionless. A thick red velvet rope, the kind usually reserved to keep the paparazzi away from movie stars, was stretched tight across the main entrance. But it wasn't there to keep people out. It was there to seal the blast radius. I turned the corner in my Ford F-150. The truck bed was loaded with my cooler, my tackle box, and 2 folding chairs. I wasn't wearing the navy blue suit. I was wearing my lucky fishing vest, the one with the grease stain on the left pocket and the frayed hem. Underneath, I had on a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. I looked exactly like what I was supposed to be to these people. A nobody. A blue-collar retiree who had taken a wrong turn on the way to the lake. The scene in front of the hotel was a masterpiece of public humiliation. Jason and Sarah were standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by a pile of Louis Vuitton suitcases that security had unceremoniously wheeled out of the lobby. Jason was no longer in his silk robe. He had thrown on a wrinkled dress shirt and slacks, but he was barefoot. In the rush to evict him, he had apparently left his Italian leather shoes in the suite. Sarah was sitting on one of the suitcases, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She was wearing designer yoga pants and a hoodie that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She looked small. She looked defeated. But she didn't look up. And then the audience arrived. A black town car pulled up behind a delivery van. Then a Bentley. Then a sleek Tesla. The VIPs. The investors. The people Jason needed to impress to keep his house of cards standing. They were arriving early for the pre-ceremony networking brunch Jason had promised them. Instead of mimosas and harp music, they were greeted by the sight of the groom screaming at a stone-faced security guard while standing barefoot on the concrete. I watched a man I recognized from the business pages, a venture capitalist named Sterling Vance, roll down the window of his Bentley. He looked at Jason. He looked at the pile of luggage. He looked at the closed doors. He didn't get out. He simply shook his head, rolled the window back up, and signaled his driver to move on. That was the moment I chose to make my entrance. I didn't head for the service entrance. I didn't look for a parking spot in the garage. I drove my rumbling, rusting truck right up the center lane of the circular driveway, bypassing the line of luxury cars. The muffler on my Ford has a distinct cough, a loud guttural rattle that echoed off the glass facade of the hotel. It was a sound that didn't belong there. It was the sound of real work invading a sanctuary of pretense. I pulled up directly in front of the main doors, blocking the path of a Lexus. I put the truck in park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. Jason spun around. His eyes were wild, bloodshot from stress and lack of caffeine. When he saw the truck, his face went through a spectrum of colors, settling on a deep, violent crimson. He didn't see a father. He didn't see a savior. He saw a stain. He saw the final nail in the coffin of his image. He charged toward the truck. He moved like a man possessed, ignoring the gravel digging into his bare feet. "What the hell are you doing here?" he screamed. His voice cracked high and hysterical. I opened the door and stepped out. My fishing boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud. I adjusted my baseball cap and looked at him. "I told you not to come," Jason yelled, getting right in my face. Spittle flew from his mouth. "I told you the back door. I told you 10 o'clock. Look at you. Look at this truck. You are ruining everything." He gestured wildly around him, as if my truck was the reason he was standing on the curb with his luggage. "Get out of here, Bernie," he hissed. "Leave. Now, before the investors see you. Do you have any idea who is supposed to be here right now? Do you have any idea how important these people are?" Sarah looked up then. Her eyes were red and swollen. She saw me. She saw the fishing vest. She saw the truck. "Dad. Please," she sobbed. "Just go. Jason is under a lot of pressure. We don't need this right now." That was the knife. Even as she sat on the curb, evicted and humiliated, she was still protecting him. She was still ashamed of me. She was still worried about the optics. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Jason. He was panting, his chest heaving. He reached out and shoved my chest, trying to push me back toward the driver's seat. I didn't move. I am 73, but I spent 40 years lifting crates that would break a man like Jason in half. I stood like a statue. "I am not here for the wedding, Jason," I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. "I am here to pick something up." "Pick what up?" Jason screamed. "We don't have anything for you. We don't have food for you. We don't have a seat for you. We have nothing. You are a distraction. You are an embarrassment. Go catch your fish and leave the business to the adults." Henri Laurent, the general manager, stepped out of the revolving doors. He was flanked by 2 large security guards. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, not a hair out of place. He walked toward us with a purposeful stride. Jason saw him, and his demeanor changed instantly. He tried to straighten his shirt. He tried to hide his bare feet behind a suitcase. He put on his best sycophant smile. Henri, Jason said, his voice pleading. "Thank God. Look, this man is bothering us. He is trespassing. Please have security remove him and his vehicle. I am sure we can sort out the billing misunderstanding once we get back inside." Laurent didn't look at Jason. He walked past him as if he were a ghost. He walked straight to me. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. He looked at my fishing vest. He looked at my old truck. He didn't blink. I reached into the pocket of my cargo pants and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a single sheet typed up by Mitch earlier that morning. It was a formal revocation of sponsorship. It was the document that legally dissolved the shadow company that had been paying for Jason's dream life. I held it out. "I believe this belongs to you, Henri," I said. Laurent took the paper. He didn't read it. He already knew what it said because Mitch had emailed a digital copy at 6:30. He folded it neatly and placed it in his inside pocket. Then he did something that made the remaining color drain from Jason's face. Henri Laurent, the manager of the most exclusive hotel in Chicago, bowed his head. It wasn't a nod. It was a bow, a gesture of deep professional respect. "Good morning, Chairman Kowalski," Laurent said. His voice was clear, carrying over the noise of the city. Jason froze. The word hung in the air. "Chairman." What Jason whispered. Laurent continued ignoring Jason completely. "We have executed your instructions to the letter, Chairman. The master account has been closed. The vendors have been dismissed. The suite has been vacated. We have also prepared the itemized receipt for the cancellation fees you requested." "Cancellation fees," I said. "Put them on my personal ledger. I don't want these two worrying about the bill. They have enough problems." "Of course," Sir Laurent said. Jason looked at Laurent, then at me, then back at Laurent. His brain was misfiring. He couldn't connect the dots. He couldn't reconcile the image of Bernie the fisherman with the title chairman. "Wait," Jason stammered. "Henri, why are you calling him that?" "This is Bernie. He fixes trucks. He is nobody." Laurent turned slowly to face Jason. The look of disdain on the manager's face was withering. "Mr. Sterling," Laurent said coldly, "you seem to be under a significant misapprehension. This hotel does not extend $500,000 lines of credit to nobodies. The angel sponsor you have been bragging about for 6 months, the holding company that financed your lifestyle." Laurent paused for effect. "It is fully owned by Mr. Kowalski." The silence that crashed down on the sidewalk was heavier than the truck I was driving. Jason's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me with a horror that was absolute. He looked at the fishing vest he had mocked. He looked at the hands he had called rough. "You," Jason wheezed. "You are the investor." I took a step closer to him. I smelled the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne turning sour. "I am not an investor, Jason," I said. "I am the man who decided you weren't worth the investment." Sarah stood up from the suitcase. Her face was pale. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad. What is going on? What are you saying?" I looked at my daughter. I wanted to see strength. I wanted to see her get angry at him. I wanted to see her realize that he was a fraud and I was her father. But all I saw was panic. Panic that the money was gone. "I am saying, Sarah, that I was the one paying for the flowers," I said. "I was the one paying for the lobster. I was the one paying for this hotel. And last night when your fiancé told me I wasn't important enough to walk through the front door, I decided to stop paying." Jason grabbed my arm. His grip was weak, desperate. "Bernie, wait," he said, his voice trembling. "This is a joke, right? A test, you have that kind of money. Why didn't you say anything? We are family. We can fix this." I didn't mean it. It was just stress. The wedding stress, you know how it is. He was trying to smile. It was a gruesome, twisted thing. "We can still do this," Jason babbled. "We can get everyone back inside. You can sit in the front row. Hell, you can officiate. Just tell Henri to open the doors." "Please, Bernie. The investors are watching." I looked down at his hand on my arm. I looked at him with the same expression I used when I found a rat in my warehouse. I pulled my arm away. He stumbled back. "I drove here to pick up my refund." "Jason," I said. "I didn't drive here to negotiate with terrorists." I turned back to my truck. I opened the door and climbed into the cab. I looked down at them one last time. Two people standing in the wreckage of their own vanity. You said you only wanted important people, I said, starting the engine. Well, I am the most important person in your life right now, because I own the debt you are about to drown in. I put the truck in gear. Have a nice day, I said. I drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. The show was over, but the lesson was just beginning. And as I merged back into traffic dialing Mitch for Phase 2, I knew that stripping them of the wedding was the easy part. Taking away everything else was going to be the real work. The silence that followed Henry Laurent's declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a car crash or a structural collapse. Jason Sterling stood on the sidewalk barefoot and shivering, staring at the hotel manager as if the man had just spoken in tongues. The word chairman hung in the cold morning air, heavy and impossible. Jason looked at Henry, then he looked at me, sitting in the cab of my beat-up Ford, wearing a fishing vest stained with trout bait. His brain was trying to process an equation that didn't make sense. In his world, money looked like shiny shoes and silk ties. Money didn't look like me, Chairman Jason whispered. The word sounded like it tasted like ash in his mouth. Who is the chairman? You. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Bernie, you fix trucks. You live in a house with vinyl siding. You are nobody. I didn't answer him. I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe him a biography. I shifted my gaze past him to the person who actually mattered. The person whose reaction I had been dreading yet needing to see. Sarah. My daughter was standing next to a stack of designer luggage, her face a mask of ruined makeup and disbelief. She wasn't looking at Jason. She was looking at me. Her eyes weren't filled with the realization that her father was a secret titan of industry. They weren't filled with gratitude that I had been the silent hand guiding her life. They were filled with hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. She marched toward the truck. She grabbed the side mirror, her knuckles white. "What are you doing, Dad?" she screamed. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the morning traffic noise. "Have you lost your mind? You just humiliated us in front of the entire city. This is the most important day of my life, and you are playing some sick power game." I looked at her. I saw the little girl I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had comforted when her first boyfriend broke her heart. But those people were gone. Standing there was a stranger in expensive yoga pants who measured her self-worth by the guest list of a party she couldn't afford. "I am not playing a game, Sarah," I said quietly. "I am ending one." "You ruined it," she sobbed, hitting the door of my truck with her fist. "You ruined everything." The senator was coming. The investors. "Do you know how hard Jason worked for this? Do you know what this means for our brand?" Our brand. She didn't talk about her marriage. She didn't talk about her love. She talked about her brand. "Jason didn't work for this, Rahor," I said. "I did." She stopped hitting the truck. She looked at me with confusion that quickly hardened back into anger. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. Jason secured the angel sponsor. He pitched the business plan. He got the funding. You just sat in your recliner watching baseball. I opened the center console of my truck. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I had brought it for this exact moment. It contained the receipts. Not the receipts for the flowers or the lobster. The receipts for their life. I tossed the envelope out the window. It landed at her feet with a heavy thud. "Open it," I said. Sarah looked at the envelope, then at me. She picked it up slowly. Her hands were shaking. She tore open the top and pulled out the first document. It was a deed. "That penthouse you live in," I said, my voice hard. "The one with the view of the lake. The one Jason told you he secured through a strategic partnership with a real estate developer." Sarah stared at the paper. I bought the building 3 years ago, I said. I put it in a blind trust. You don't pay rent, Sarah. You pay a maintenance fee to a management company I own. I have been letting you live in a $2 million apartment for pennies because I didn't want you to worry about housing while you finished your degree. She flipped to the next page. It was a vehicle registration. The Porsche. I continued. The Cayenne Turbo that Jason drives to his meetings to look successful. He told you the company leased it for him. He was right. The company did lease it. My company. BK Holdings pays the $2,000 monthly note on that car. I have been paying for him to drive around town looking like a king while I drive this truck. Sarah was flipping through the pages faster now. Her breathing was shallow. Credit card statements, utility bills, the engagement ring insurance policy. Every single thing you have, Sarah, I said. Every stitch of clothing, every meal, every vacation. It all came from the same account. It came from the money I made sweating in warehouses for 40 years. I created the angel sponsor persona because I knew Jason wouldn't take money from a blue-collar father-in-law. His ego is too fragile, so I let him believe he was a business genius winning over an investor. But the only investor was me. Sarah dropped the papers. They scattered on the wind, blowing across the pavement like dead leaves. She looked up at me, and for a second, I thought I saw shame. I thought I saw the realization that she had been biting the hand that fed her. But then she looked at Jason. She saw him standing there broken and humiliated, and she made her choice. You lied to us, she whispered. You manipulated us. You let us believe we were building something on our own, and you were just pulling the strings the whole time. You are sick. I felt a coldness settle in my gut that was colder than the Chicago wind. I was protecting you, I said. I was giving you a head start. You were controlling us, she screamed. And now, because Jason didn't give you the respect you think you deserve, you take it all away. You are a petty, jealous old man. I didn't answer. There was no point. She was too far gone. She had drunk the Kool-Aid. She believed that the illusion Jason had built was real, and that I was the villain for turning on the lights. But Jason was a different animal. He had been listening. He had been watching the papers fly around the sidewalk. His brain, which usually ran on buzzwords and ego, had finally latched onto a solid fact. Bernie had the money. Bernie had all the money. The transformation was instantaneous and disgusting. The rage vanished from his face. The humiliation disappeared. In its place appeared a smile so fake it looked like it had been painted on. He stepped over the scattered papers. He stepped over his own dignity. He walked right up to the window of the truck, placing his hands on the frame, as if we were old buddies chatting at a barbecue. Bernie, he said. His voice was breathless, excited. Oh my God. Bernie, why didn't you say so? He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. This is incredible, he said. You are the angel. You are BK Holdings. I knew it. I knew there was something special about you. I always told Sarah your dad has a sharp mind. He reached into the window, trying to pat my shoulder. I leaned back, avoiding his touch. Look, this is all a big misunderstanding, Jason said, talking a mile a minute. The important people comment. I didn't mean you, Bernie. I meant you know strangers, distractions. But you are the chairman. You are the most important person here. He looked at the hotel, then back at me. We can fix this, right? You can call Henry back. Tell him to turn the ovens back on. We can get the guests back. We can spin this. It is a power move. The mysterious billionaire father-in-law reveals himself. The press will love it. It adds value to the narrative. He was actually pitching me. Standing barefoot on the sidewalk, having just been evicted, he was pitching me on how my own betrayal could be monetized. Come on, Dad, Jason said, using the word for the first time. We are family. We are one house. You, me, Sarah. We are a team. You have the capital, I have the vision. We can build an empire together. Just unlock the cards. Let's get married. Let's celebrate. I looked at him. I looked at the man who 12 hours ago had told me to use the back door. I looked at the man who had treated my daughter like a prop for his brand. I looked at the man who had never worked a hard day in his life, but felt entitled to the fruits of my labor. I opened the truck door. Jason stepped back, thinking I was getting out to hug him, thinking I was getting out to save him. I stepped down onto the pavement. I stood toe-to-toe with him. I am 3 inches shorter than him, but in that moment I towered over him. I looked down at his feet. His expensive Italian leather loafers were gone, left in the suite he couldn't pay for. He was wearing cheap hotel slippers that he must have grabbed on the way out. They were flimsy white and already stained gray from the Chicago street. I cleared my throat. I summoned 40 years of warehouse dust and cigar smoke, and I spat. A thick glob of spit landed right on the toe of his left slipper. Jason flinched. He looked down at the spit, then up at me, his eyes wide with shock. Family, I said. My voice was a growl. You think we are family, Bernie? Jason stammered. I pointed a finger in his face. It was a finger missing the tip of the nail from a crush injury in '82. You aren't family, I said. You are a parasite. You attached yourself to my daughter because you smelled money even if you didn't know where it came from. You drained my accounts. You lived in my house. You drove my car. And the minute you thought you didn't need me, you tried to throw me in the trash like a used wrapper. I stepped closer. He smelled of fear and cheap sweat. You said you only wanted important people, Jason, I said. Let me teach you a lesson about importance. Importance isn't about who comes to your wedding. It isn't about senators or investors. Importance is about who signs the checks. I looked over his shoulder at Sarah. She had stopped screaming. She was watching us, her mouth open. And the most important rule of business, Jason, I said, staring into his soul, is that the investor gets to pull the plug whenever he smells a fraud. I climbed back into my truck. I slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You want to be important, I said through the open window. Go be important. But you are going to do it on your own dime. I put the truck in gear and peeled out of the driveway. I watched them in the rearview mirror as they shrank into the distance. 2 small figures on a big sidewalk, surrounded by luggage they couldn't carry in front of a hotel they couldn't enter. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean. The surgery was over. The tumor had been removed. Now the healing could begin. Or the dying. That part was up to them. But I wasn't done yet. The wedding was just the party. The real infrastructure of their lives. The company, the apartment, the future that was still standing. And I had a demolition schedule to keep. I did not drive home. I pulled my truck into the service alley of the office building, directly across the street from the Grand Monarch. I cut the engine, rolled down the window, and poured myself a cup of coffee from my thermos. I wasn't going to miss the second act. The wedding was dead bleeding out on the pavement, but the execution of Jason Sterling's career was scheduled for 9:15, and Mitch was never late. From my vantage point, I watched the ants scurry. The sidewalk was a theater of desperation. The red velvet rope was still up, but it was now acting as a barrier to keep Jason in, not to keep the paparazzi out. The important people had started to arrive in force. Senator Miller's motorcade had pulled up. I watched the senator, a man who had shaken my hand at a fundraiser 3 years ago, when I was wearing a tuxedo, step out of his Lincoln. He looked at the pile of luggage. He looked at the barefoot groom. He looked at the hysterical bride. He didn't look confused. He looked disgusted. Jason was running toward him, waving his arms like a man drowning. I could almost hear the pitch, the technical difficulties, the misunderstanding, the bank error. But the senator was a man who survived on image, and standing next to a barefoot man who had just been evicted from a hotel was political suicide. The senator got back in his car before the door had even fully closed. That is when the black town car turned the corner. It moved through the chaos like a shark swimming through a school of panicked tuna. It pulled up right to the curb, inches from where Jason was hyperventilating. The back door opened, and Mitchell O'Connor stepped out. Mitch is 6'4". He wears bespoke suits that cost more than Jason's car. He carries a leather briefcase that looks like it contains nuclear launch codes. To Jason, Mitch was just another stranger. To me, he was the grim reaper of the corporate world. I watched Jason straighten up. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. He saw the suit. He saw the car. He saw a lifeline. He thought Mitch was another investor, another important person he could charm. He stepped forward, extending a hand, putting on that shark-like smile that had conned so many people. I took a sip of coffee. This was going to be good. Mitch didn't shake his hand. He didn't smile. He walked past the luggage and stood directly in front of Jason. He opened his briefcase on the hood of the senator's departing Lincoln, using it as a desk. He pulled out a document bound in blue legal paper. "Jason Sterling," Mitch said. His voice carries. It is a courtroom voice. Jason blinked. "Yes." "Who are you, Are you from the bank?" "We can sort this out." "I am Mitchell O'Connor, representing Blue Horizon Venture Capital," Mitch said. Jason's face lit up. It was pathetic. Blue Horizon was his lifeline. It was the only reason his company, Sterling Tech, existed. We had led his seed round with a $2 million injection 6 months ago. We were the reason he had an office. We were the reason he had a staff. We were the reason he could pay the lease on his Porsche. Oh, thank God, Jason exhaled, his shoulders dropping. Blue Horizon. "Listen, we are having a slight liquidity crisis with the personal accounts. I need to speak to the partners. I need an emergency bridge loan. Just 50 grand. I can authorize equity." Mitch stared at him. He handed him the blue document. "We are not here to offer a bridge loan, Mr. Sterling," Mitch said. "We are here to serve you with a notice of default and immediate clawback." Jason froze. He looked at the paper, but he didn't take it. Mitch shoved it into his chest. Jason grabbed it instinctively. "Clawback." Jason stammered, "What are you talking about?" "We are hitting our KPIs. The beta launch is next month. You can't pull the funding. We have a contract." Mitch adjusted his cufflinks. "We do have a contract," Mitch said. "And I suggest you read Section 14, Paragraph C, the moral turpitude clause." Jason looked around. Guests were watching. Valets were watching. "Moral turpitude," Jason hissed. "I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't been arrested." "The clause is quite broad, Mr. Sterling," Mitch said, his voice bored. "It allows Blue Horizon to dissolve the partnership and demand immediate repayment of all principal investment if the founder engages in conduct that brings disrepute, scandal, or public embarrassment to the firm or its stakeholders." Mitch gestured to the sidewalk, to the luggage, to the barefoot groom screaming at a hotel manager, to the senator driving away in disgust. "I would say getting evicted from a 5-star hotel for attempted fraud and non-payment on your wedding day qualifies as public embarrassment," Mitch said. "You are toxic assets, Jason. And Blue Horizon does not hold toxic assets." Jason laughed. It was a wet, cracking sound. "You can't do this," he said. "You can't just pull $2 million because of a bad morning. I will call the board. I will call the primary shareholder." "You can try," Mitch said. "But the primary shareholder is the one who drafted this notice." Jason stopped. The gears of tears in his head were grinding, stripping metal. He looked at the document. He looked at the logo of Blue Horizon. It was a stylized sun rising over water. It was the same logo that was on the paperwork for his apartment. The same logo that was on the lease for his company. The primary shareholder, Jason, whispered. Mitch nodded. He turned slightly and pointed across the street. He pointed right at my truck. I raised my coffee cup in a toast. Jason saw me. He saw the fishing vest. He saw the man he had told to use the back door. And then he saw the truth. It hit him harder than the eviction. Bernie, Jason choked out. Bernie is Blue Horizon. Mitch closed his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like a judge's gavel. Mr. Kowalski founded Blue Horizon 20 years ago to diversify his logistics profits, Mitch explained calmly. He funded your startup because he wanted to give his future son-in-law a chance to prove he wasn't a fraud. You failed that test, Jason. You failed it spectacularly. Jason dropped the legal papers. They joined the pile of receipts blowing in the wind. But the business, Jason pleaded, grabbing Mitch's lapel. Mitch swatted his hand away. The business is real. We have employees. We have servers. We have code. You can't just kill it. We aren't killing it, Mitch said. We are repossessing it. The assets of Sterling Tech were used as collateral for the investment. Since you are in default, the assets now belong to us. That is when Jason's phone began to ring. It wasn't a text. It was a call. Jason looked at the screen. It was his chief technology officer. He answered it on speakerphone, his hands shaking so hard the phone was vibrating against his ear. Jason, the CTO, screamed. What is going on? What do you mean? Jason yelled back. The lights just went out, the CTO shouted. The building management just walked in with the police. They are putting yellow tape on the doors. They say the lease has been terminated effective immediately. Jason stared at the phone. And the servers, Jason the CTO, continued, panic rising in his voice. I can't log in to AWS. The credentials have been revoked. The admin access is gone. The site is down. It is all down. Error 404 everywhere. The investors are calling me. The clients are emailing. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Jason screamed. It is a mistake. It is not a mistake, Mitch interjected, leaning toward the phone. This is Mitchell O'Connor, legal counsel for the primary investor. Tell the staff to go home. Their final checks will be mailed on Monday. The intellectual property now belongs to Blue Horizon. Do not attempt to remove any hardware from the premises. Security is already in the lobby. Jason lowered the phone. The voice of his CTO was still tinny and screaming, but Jason wasn't listening. He looked at his phone. Notifications were flooding the screen. LinkedIn alerts, emails from vendors, texts from employees. The digital empire he thought he built was dissolving into pixels. He looked at Sarah. She was standing next to the luggage, silent. She had heard every word. She had heard that her father owned the company. She had heard that her husband was unemployed. She had heard that the man she called a jealous old loser was the only reason she had ever tasted caviar. Jason fell to his knees. Literally. His knees hit the concrete hard. He didn't seem to feel it. He looked up at Mitch. Please, Jason wept, tears mixed with snot on his face. Please don't do this. This is my life work. I have nothing else. I will do anything. I will apologize. I will beg. I will wash his truck. Just turn the servers back on. Mitch looked down at him with the cold indifference of a man who was billing $400 an hour. It is too late for apologies, Mr. Sterling, Mitch said. You told Mr. Kowalski that you only wanted important people. You made it very clear that importance is defined by value. Well, the value of your company is now zero, which makes you, by your own definition, unimportant. Mitch turned and walked back to the town car. The driver opened the door. Mitch paused and looked back at Sarah. Your father wanted me to give you this, Mitch said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. He handed it to Sarah. She took it. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single key. It wasn't a key to a penthouse. It wasn't a key to a Porsche. It was a rusty brass key. "That is the key to the back door of his house," Mitch said. "He said if you ever decide you want to be his daughter instead of a brand ambassador, you know where to find him. But do not bring the husband." Mitch got in the car. The door closed. The Lincoln pulled away, merging into traffic and disappearing. I watched them for another minute. Jason was on his knees, sobbing into his hands. Sarah was staring at the rusty key, her thumb tracing the grooves. The wind picked up, swirling the legal papers around them like a tornado of bad decisions. The wedding was gone. The home was gone. The car was gone. The company was gone. The reputation was gone. In less than 12 hours, I had stripped them down to the studs. I had taken away every single layer of insulation I had wrapped around them. Now they were going to feel the cold. I put my truck in gear. I had one more stop to make. The destruction of Jason was complete, but there were two other people who had helped create this monster: Richard and Cynthia Sterling. They were somewhere inside that hotel lobby, hiding, pretending they weren't involved. But they were about to find out that when you play with fire, you don't just get burned. You get incinerated. And I had brought plenty of fuel. I stayed in the alley for 10 minutes, watching Jason weep on the pavement, while my daughter stared at a rusty key. It was a pathetic tableau, but it wasn't complete. The architects of this disaster, the people who had raised a son to believe that value was determined by a price tag, were still missing. I knew they wouldn't hide in the lobby forever. Richard and Cynthia Sterling were like cockroaches. Eventually, they would scuttle out to see if there was anything left to eat. Sure enough, the revolving doors spun. Richard Sterling burst onto the sidewalk, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his face a mask of purple rage. Cynthia trotted behind him, clutching a clutch purse that I now knew was a knockoff, her heels clicking frantically on the concrete. They saw Jason on his knees. They saw the scattered legal papers, and then they saw my truck parked across the street. They didn't run to their son. They didn't offer comfort to their daughter-in-law. They charged straight for me. I rolled down my window as Richard slammed his hands against the door of my Ford. He was panting, his eyes bulging. He looked like a man who was watching his life raft deflate. "You son of a bitch!" Richard screamed, spitting on my windshield. "Who do you think you are? You think you can walk in here and cancel my son's wedding? You think you can embarrass us like this? I will have you arrested. I will sue you for every penny you have, you miserable old fraud." Cynthia joined the chorus, her voice shrill and piercing. "He is a criminal, Richard!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Look at him. He drives a garbage truck. There is no way he owns an investment firm. He is a con artist. He probably stole someone's identity. He is laundering money. Call the police, Richard. Tell them he is harassing us. Tell them he is dangerous." I sat there sipping my coffee, watching them unravel. They were projecting. They were accusing me of the very things they saw in the mirror every morning. They were terrified, not because the wedding was canceled, but because the ATM had just been ripped out of the wall. "You are finished, Kowalski," Richard yelled, trying to open my locked door. "I know people in this town. I know judges. I know the mayor. I am going to bury you. You are going to rot in a cell for fraud. Where did you get the money, huh? Dealing drugs out of this truck. Robbing pensioners." I set my coffee down in the cup holder. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. I called a number saved as Garrett, P.I. I hit the speakerphone button and held the phone up to the open window. "Garrett," I said calmly. "I have an audience. Read the file." The voice that came through the speaker that was dry, gravelly, and terrifyingly precise. It wasn't the voice of a man who made guesses. It was the voice of a man who dug through trash cans and hacked hard drives for a living. Subject 1. Garrett's voice crackled. Richard Sterling, currently unemployed. License to practice real estate revoked 2 years ago for ethics violations. Primary source of income listed as consulting, but no invoices found. Richard stopped banging on my door. He froze. His face went from purple to a sickly shade of gray. Current liabilities. Garrett continued reading down a list that sounded like a financial autopsy. Outstanding gambling debt to the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas, $412,000. Promissory notes signed to 3 different loan sharks in Chicago, $150,000. The silence on the sidewalk was heavy. Even the traffic seemed to quiet down. Status of primary residence, Garrett droned on. The property at 42 Willow Creek Drive is currently under a 3rd mortgage. Notice of default filed by the bank last Tuesday. Foreclosure auction scheduled for November 1st. Cynthia gasped. She looked at her husband. You told me you paid the mortgage, Richard. You said the consulting deal came through. Richard didn't look at her. He was staring at the phone as if it were a bomb. Garrett wasn't done. Subject 2, he said. Cynthia Sterling, self-employed fashion reseller, currently under investigation by the Illinois Attorney General for the distribution of counterfeit luxury goods. 3 pending civil lawsuits from clients who purchased handbags authenticated as genuine, which were later proven to be high-grade replicas imported from Guangzhou. Cynthia dropped her clutch. It hit the pavement with a hollow sound. I ended the call. I looked at them. They weren't screaming anymore. They were shrinking. They looked like balloons that had been pricked with a needle. So I said, leaning out the window, "Let me get this straight. You wanted to call the police on me for fraud." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Jason, who was still on his knees across the street watching his parents disintegrate. "You didn't want this wedding because you love my daughter," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't want this wedding because you care about Jason's happiness. You wanted this wedding because you needed a bailout." I looked at Richard. "You were banking on the dowry, weren't you, Richard? You thought that if Jason married the daughter of a secret millionaire, or even just a girl with a good credit score, you could guilt them into covering your Vegas debt. You were going to use my daughter's future to pay for your past." I looked at Cynthia. "And you needed the photos. You needed the social clout of a high society wedding to distract your clients from the fact that you are selling them fake leather. You wanted to stand in that ballroom and pretend you weren't a criminal." The shame on their faces was palpable. It was thick and greasy. But they didn't apologize. People like Richard and Cynthia don't know how to apologize. They only know how to attack or flee. Richard straightened his jacket. He tried to summon a shred of his former arrogance, but it was gone. "You can't prove any of that," he muttered. "That is all hearsay. It is illegal to investigate private citizens. I will sue you for invasion of privacy." That is when the sirens started. They grew loud fast. 2 squad cars turned the corner lights flashing. They screeched to a halt behind my truck, blocking the alley exit. Cynthia let out a triumphant shriek. "See," she yelled, pointing at me. "The police are here. They are here for you, you old lunatic. You are going to jail. Richard, tell them he threatened us. Tell them he has a gun." 2 officers stepped out of the first car. They were big men. They walked toward us with their hands resting near their holsters. Richard puffed out his chest. He stepped toward the officers, putting on his best aggrieved citizen face. "Officers, thank God," Richard said. "This man is dangerous. He has been harassing my family. He has illegally accessed our financial records. I want to press charges immediately." The lead officer, a sergeant with a gray mustache, walked right past Richard. He stopped at my window. "Mr. Kowalski," the sergeant said, nodding at me. "Sergeant," I replied. The sergeant turned to Richard. "Are you Richard Sterling?" he asked. Richard blinked. "Yes. I am the victim here. This man is Mr. Sterling." The sergeant interrupted, pulling a folded paper from his belt. "I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the district attorney's office." Richard's knees buckled. "Arrest? For what?" "I haven't done anything." "Charge is felony credit fraud and wire fraud," the sergeant said, reading from the warrant. "It seems you falsified loan applications to 3 separate banks using your son's identity as a cosigner without his knowledge." Jason, who had been watching from the curb, let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He scrambled to his feet and ran across the street. "Dad," Jason yelled. "You did what? You used my name. You told me those papers were for the trust fund." Richard looked at his son. He looked at the handcuffs the officer was unhooking from his belt. He looked at the hotel where he was supposed to be drinking champagne. "I had to," Jason Richard whispered. "I was going to pay it back. Once the company took off. Once you got the funding. It was a bridge loan. I did it for us." "You did it for yourself," Jason spat. "You ruined my credit. You ruined my company. You ruined my life." The sergeant spun Richard around and slammed him against the hood of the squad car. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound on the street. Cynthia was backing away, trying to blend into the brick wall of the hotel. But the second officer was already moving toward her. "Mrs. Sterling," the officer said, "we also have a summons for you regarding the counterfeit goods investigation. We aren't arresting you today, but you are ordered to surrender your passport and appear in court on Monday morning. Do not leave the city." Cynthia burst into tears. Real ugly tears, not because she was sorry, but because the party was over. I watched from my truck. It was a complete demolition. The father in handcuffs, the mother served with a subpoena, the son bankrupt and betrayed, the daughter standing alone in the wreckage. Richard was shoved into the back of the squad car. He looked at me through the glass. His eyes were filled with hate, but also fear. He knew I had done this. He knew I had pulled the trigger. Mitch had filed the police report regarding the credit fraud at 8 a.m. He had included the forensic accounting report Garrett had compiled. It was a slam dunk. The sergeant tapped on my window again. "You good here, Mr. Kowalski?" he asked. "I am good, Sergeant," I said. "Just watching the trash get taken out." The sergeant cracked a smile. "Drive safe, Bernie." The squad cars pulled away, lights flashing, carrying the patriarch of the Sterling family to central booking. Cynthia sat on the curb, weeping into her hands. Jason stood in the middle of the street, staring at the spot where his father had just been arrested. I put my truck in gear. The engine rumbled. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say to them. They were stripped bare. The important people they wanted to be were exposed as frauds. The money they worshipped had turned into handcuffs. I looked at Sarah one last time. She was looking at Jason, then at his mother, then at the departing police car. The horror on her face was total. She was realizing that she hadn't just married a loser. She had married into a crime family. And the only person who had tried to warn her, the only person who had actually protected her, was the man driving away in the Ford F-150. I pulled out of the alley and turned onto the main avenue. The sun was high in the sky now. It was a beautiful day in Chicago. I had a fishing trip to get to. The lake was calling. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't have a wedding to pay for. I didn't have a secret to keep. I was just Bernie, and that was enough. The sirens faded into the distance, taking Richard Sterling to a booking cage and leaving a silence that felt heavier than the concrete beneath my boots. The show was over. The police were gone. The guests were gone. It was just me sitting in my idling truck and 2 people standing on the curb amidst the wreckage of their lives. I stayed in the cab. I didn't get out. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and I waited. This was the moment. This was the pivot point. I had exposed the rot. I had surgically removed the cancer that was the Sterling family from my daughter's life. I had shown her that her husband was a fraud, her father-in-law was a felon, and her lifestyle was a charity case funded by the very man she was ashamed of. I waited for Sarah to walk across the street. I waited for her to open the passenger door, climb in, and rest her head on my shoulder like she did when she was 10 years old and had scraped her knee. I was ready to drive her home. I was ready to make her a hot chocolate. I was ready to help her rebuild. But she didn't move toward the truck. She turned toward Jason. He was still standing in the middle of the street, staring at the empty space where the police car had been. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone. And Sarah, my daughter, the woman I had raised to be strong and independent, walked over to him. She didn't slap him. She didn't scream at him for lying about the company, the money, or his father. She took his hand. I felt a sharp pain in my chest right behind the sternum. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the feeling of my heart breaking for the final time. She whispered something to him. He looked at her, his eyes wet and fearful. Then he looked at me, and I saw the shift. I saw the moment his survival instinct kicked in. He whispered back to her, pointing at my truck, his face twisting into a mask of victimhood. They walked toward me together. United. I rolled down the window. I didn't speak. I let them make the first move. Sarah stopped 3 feet from the door. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was cold, set in a hard line that made her look 10 years older. "Are you happy now, Dad?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "Did you get what you wanted? Did you get your revenge?" I looked at her. "I didn't want revenge, Sarah," I said gently. "I wanted the truth. I wanted you to see who you were marrying." "I see who I am marrying," she snapped. "I see a man who was under enormous pressure. I see a man who tried to give me the world and made mistakes because he was terrified of failing. And I see a father who sat on a mountain of gold and watched us drown just to teach us a lesson." I blinked. The logic was so twisted, it took my breath away. "I didn't watch you drown," I said. "I built the boat you were sailing on. I paid for everything." "That is exactly the point," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You had the money. You had millions. And you let us struggle. You let Jason stress himself sick over payroll. You let us worry about rent. You let us humiliate ourselves trying to impress people when you could have just written a check and fixed everything. You are cruel, Dad. You are a sad, cruel old man who hoards money because he doesn't know how to love people." Jason stepped forward then. He had found his courage again, hiding behind my daughter's skirts. "She is right, Bernie," Jason said. His voice was shaky but defiant. "You entrapped us. You set us up to fail. You acted as the angel sponsor, which created a fiduciary duty, pulling the funding on the morning of the event. That is bad faith. That is tortious interference." I looked at him. The audacity was breathtaking. He was broke. His father was in jail. His company was repossessed, and he was already trying to figure out how to sue me. "You committed fraud, Jason," I said. "You lied to banks. You lied to me." Jason shook his head. "I did what I had to do to survive," he said. "And Sarah understands that. We are partners. We are a team. And we are not going to let you destroy us." Sarah squeezed his hand. She looked at me with eyes that were no longer my daughter's eyes. They were the eyes of a stranger who smelled a settlement. "We are leaving, Dad," she said. "Where are you going to go?" I asked. "You have no apartment. You have no car. You have no money." "We will figure it out," she said. "But we are not going with you. And don't think this is over. Jason says we have rights. You can't just cut us off after establishing a pattern of support. That is financial abuse." She took a breath, and then she delivered the blow that she knew would kill me. "We are going to sue you, Dad," she said. "We are going to sue you for my share of the estate. I am your only child. That money is my birthright. It is my legal inheritance. And since you are clearly incompetent and vindictive, we are going to ask the court to give us control of the trust now." Legal inheritance. Birthright. She was standing on the street defending a man who had lied to her for years and threatening to sue her own father for the money he made hauling crates in the rain while she was sleeping in a warm bed. I looked at Jason. He was smirking. A tiny, victorious smirk. He had lost the battle, but he thought he had won the war because he had turned my own blood against me. He thought he could use her as a weapon to pry open my bank account. I looked back at Sarah. I waited for a flinch. I waited for her to realize what she had just said, but she just stared at me, chin raised, defiant in her entitlement. "Okay, Sarah," I said. My voice was very quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't tell her that an inheritance is a gift, not a right. I didn't tell her that she was being used by a con artist who would drain her dry the second he got access to the funds. I just nodded. "If that is your choice," I said. "It is," she said. "Come on, Jason." They turned around. They began walking down the avenue away from the hotel, away from my truck, away from me. They looked like refugees dragging their expensive suitcases over the cracked sidewalk, heading nowhere. I watched them until they turned the corner. I sat in the truck for a long time. The engine idled. The heater hummed. I felt a strange lightness. It was the feeling of a burden being lifted. The burden of worry. The burden of protection. The burden of hope. I had spent my whole life building a fortress to keep my daughter safe. Today, she had decided to burn it down. I reached for my phone. I dialed Mitch. He answered on the first ring. "Is she in the truck?" Bernie Mitch asked softly. "No," I said. "She is gone. She is with him. They are talking about lawsuits. They are talking about inheritance." There was a long silence on the line. Mitch knew what this meant. He knew what was coming. "I'm sorry," Bernie Mitch said. "Don't be," I said. My voice was hard as iron. "We gave them a chance, now we give them the reality." I took a sip of my cold coffee. "Mitch," I said. "Activate Phase 2. "Phase 2, Mitch repeated. "Are you sure? That is total reclamation." "I am sure," I said. "I want it all back. Everything. The furniture in the apartment. The clothes on their backs if we paid for them. The electronics, the jewelry. If I have a receipt for it, I want it repossessed. Today." "Understood," Mitch said. "I have the writ of replevin drafted. I can have a recovery team at the apartment in an hour. We can change the locks before they even figure out where they are sleeping tonight." "Do it," I said. "And Mitch, yes, boss." "Flag their social security numbers," I said. "I want to know if they try to open a bank account. I want to know if they try to rent a car. I want them to feel the pressure of the atmosphere. They want to sue me for the money. Let them try to hire a lawyer when they can't even buy a sandwich." "Consider it done," Mitch said. I hung up the phone. I put the truck in drive. The sun was shining on the streets of Chicago. But inside my cab, it was winter. I had lost a daughter, but I had regained my clarity. They wanted to play hardball. They wanted to talk about rights. I was going to show them that the only right they had was the right to remain silent, while I dismantled their world piece by piece. I drove toward the lake, leaving the wreckage of the wedding behind me. The water would be cold today. Good fishing weather. 7 days is a long time when you are sleeping on a futon that smells like wet dog in a basement apartment on the south side of Chicago. It is an even longer time when you have fallen from a penthouse view of Lake Michigan to a view of a brick wall and overflowing dumpsters. I know exactly where my daughter and her husband ended up because I paid the private investigator to park down the street and watch the slow-motion train wreck of their new life. They lasted 2 nights in a hotel before their last credit card, a secret emergency card Jason had hidden in his sock drawer, was declined for a $10 charge at a vending machine. After that, reality hit them like a sledgehammer. They had burned every bridge with their wealthy friends, the ones who only liked them when they were buying rounds of drinks. The only person who opened a door for them was a guy named Kyle, an old fraternity brother of Jason, who worked at a cell phone kiosk and lived in a garden unit that hadn't seen a vacuum cleaner since the Bush administration. I sat in my kitchen drinking black coffee and reading the daily reports from Mitch. They were brutal. They were efficient. They were exactly what I ordered. The repossession team had been thorough. On Tuesday, they took the furniture. On Wednesday, a tow truck hooked up the rental car Sarah had tried to lease using her old company credentials. She stood on the curb screaming that it was a mistake that her father was Bernard Kowalski, but the tow truck driver didn't care about names. He only cared about the lien Mitch had filed. By Friday, they were eating instant noodles and drinking tap water. But the real suffocation wasn't the lack of money. It was the silence of the phone. Jason Sterling, the visionary CEO, the man who thought he was the next Steve Jobs, couldn't get a call back for an entry-level sales job. He didn't understand why. He thought it was bad luck. He didn't know that on Monday morning I had made 3 phone calls to the heads of the Chicago Business Alliance, the Venture Capital Roundtable, and the Regional Chamber of Commerce. I didn't tell them not to hire him. That would be illegal. I simply exercised my right as a majority shareholder in several holding companies to express my deep concern regarding Mr. Sterling's history of financial irregularities and corporate fraud. In the business world, that is the kiss of death. His resume wasn't just in the trash bin. It was radioactive. The PI report from Saturday night described the scene inside Kyle's apartment in vivid detail. The walls were thin and the windows were open to catch a breeze because there was no air conditioning. The neighbors heard everything. Jason was pacing the small living room, kicking at the piles of dirty laundry. He was wearing the same clothes he had left the hotel in a week ago. His silk shirt was stained with sweat and mustard. The veneer of the sophisticated businessman had completely dissolved, revealing the cornered rat beneath. He was screaming at Sarah. He wasn't comforting her. He wasn't apologizing for the fraud that had landed them there. He was blaming her. He was blaming her for not having access to her own trust fund. He was blaming her for not stopping me. "You are useless," Jason shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion and rage. "Look at us. We are living like animals. I have sent out 50 resumes. 50. Do you know how many callbacks I got? 0. Your father poisoned the well. He blacklisted me. I can't even get a job selling used cars." Sarah was sitting on the edge of the futon, staring at the floor. Her hair was matted. She looked like a ghost of the girl who had stood in a bridal gown 7 days ago. "I can't do anything about it, Jason," she whispered. "He won't answer my calls. He changed the locks on the penthouse. The doorman wouldn't even let me up to get my shampoo." "You aren't trying hard enough," Jason snapped. He grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "He is your father. He has a soft spot for you. He always has. You are his little girl. You need to go there. You need to go to his house." "I can't," she said, pulling away. "He humiliated us. He hates us. He doesn't hate you," Jason hissed, leaning into her face. "He is trying to teach me a lesson, but he won't let you starve. You have to go there and break him. You have to cry. You have to throw yourself at his feet. Tell him I left you. Tell him you are pregnant. Tell him whatever you have to tell him to get him to write a check." Sarah looked up at him. For a second, there was a flicker of disgust in her eyes. She saw the desperation. She saw the cowardice. But then the entitlement kicked back in. The survival instinct of a girl who had never known hunger overrode her pride. She didn't see a man asking her to degrade herself. She saw a path back to comfort. "I am not going to beg," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "I am done begging. That money is mine. He made it while my mother was alive. It is marital assets. It is family money. He is stealing my future to punish you." "Exactly," Jason said, seizing on her anger. "He is the thief. He is the villain. You are just going there to claim what is rightfully yours. Go to the house. Demand a meeting. Don't leave until he gives you a transfer. Threaten him with the press. Tell him you will go to the news and say he abandoned his daughter. He cares about his reputation. He cares about being the good guy. Use that against him." Sarah stood up. She smoothed out her wrinkled clothes. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She didn't look like a woman going to apologize. She looked like a woman going to collect a debt. "I will go," she said, "but not to cry. I am going to tell him that if he doesn't unlock the accounts, I will sue him for emotional distress and financial abuse. I will drag his name through the mud until he pays us to go away." "Good girl," Jason said, sinking onto the futon, exhausted. "Get the money. I don't care how you do it. Just get the money and bring back some food." "I am starving." I put down the report. I looked out the window of my house. The sun was setting over the small backyard Sarah used to play in. I saw the swing set I had built with my own hands. I saw the garden her mother had planted. She wasn't coming to apologize. She wasn't coming because she missed me. She was coming because the parasite she married had told her to bleed the host. She was coming to threaten me in my own home. I felt a cold calm settle over me. I picked up my phone and called Mitch. "She is coming, Mitch," I said. "Do you want me to send security?" Mitch asked. "Do you want me to have the police intercept her for trespassing?" "No," I said. "Let her come. Let her knock on the door. I want to look her in the eye one last time. I want to see if there is anything left of my daughter in there, or if she is completely gone. But Mitch," I added, "bring the file. The thick one. The one with the settlement agreement she signed 5 years ago." "The gambling debt file?" Mitch asked. "Yes," I said. "She thinks she has rights. She thinks she has a claim. She forgot about the time I bailed her out before Jason even came into the picture. She forgot that she already sold her birthright to keep her record clean." "I will be there in 20 minutes, Mitch said. I hung up. I went to the front door and unlocked it. I turned on the porch light. It was a beacon. Not a beacon of welcome, but a beacon of warning. Like a lighthouse on a rocky shore, signaling that if you come too close, you will be wrecked. I sat in my old armchair in the living room. The house was quiet. I listened to the ticking of the grandfather clock. I waited for the sound of footsteps on the porch. I waited for the knock that would end the last shred of hope I had for my family. An hour later, a taxi pulled up. It was a beat-up sedan with a missing hubcap. Sarah got out. She looked thin. She looked angry. She stormed up the walkway, ignoring the flowers, ignoring the swing set. She didn't hesitate. She didn't smooth her hair. She pounded on the door with her fist. Bam, bam, bam. It wasn't a request for entry. It was a demand. "Open up, Dad," she screamed through the wood. "I know you are in there. We need to talk. Right now." I didn't get up immediately. I let her knock again. I let her scream again. I wanted her to feel the wood against her knuckles. I wanted her to feel the barrier she had built. Then I stood up. I walked to the door. I took a deep breath. I wasn't opening the door to my daughter. I was opening the door to a stranger who wanted to rob me. And I was ready. I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was not my daughter's face, but a cheap polyester suit standing next to her. Sarah was there, looking thin and frantic, her eyes darting around the porch as if she expected a trap door to open beneath her feet. But it was the man beside her who drew my attention. He was short, sweating in the cool evening air, and holding a battered briefcase that looked like he had bought it at a garage sale. He smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. This was the legal counsel Jason had managed to scrape together from the bottom of the barrel. Sarah pushed past me without a word. She marched into the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor I had refinished myself 20 years ago. She didn't look at the family photos on the mantel. She didn't look at the chair where her mother used to knit. She looked around the room with a sneer, assessing the tactical layout of the battlefield. The lawyer followed her and offering me a damp, limp hand, which I ignored. "I am Arthur P. Miller," the lawyer announced, puffing out his chest. "I am representing Mrs. Sterling in the matter of her estate and financial rights." I closed the front door and locked it. I walked past them and sat in my armchair. Mitch was already sitting in the corner in the shadows, silent as a gargoyle. On the coffee table in front of him was a single thick file folder. "Have a seat," I said. Sarah didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, vibrating with anger. "We are not here to visit Dad," she spat. "We are here to settle this. Jason and I have rights. You can't just cut off funding that we have relied on for 3 years. It is called detrimental reliance. Arthur says we have a case." She looked at the little lawyer for confirmation. He nodded vigorously, pulling a handkerchief to wipe his forehead. "That is correct," Mr. Kowalski Miller said, trying to summon a courtroom voice. "You established a pattern of financial support. You created a lifestyle expectation. By withdrawing that support without notice, causing my clients to lose their housing and employment, you have committed what we call economic abuse. We are prepared to file a civil suit for $10 million in damages unless you agree to an immediate settlement." I looked at Mitch. Mitch didn't even look up from his file. He just turned a page, the sound loud in the quiet room. "10 million, I repeated. "That is a lot of money, Sarah." "It is what we deserve," she said, her voice rising. "It is my money anyway. It is Mom's money. You are just holding it. And since you are clearly unstable, blowing up my wedding and ruining Jason's career, we don't trust you to manage it anymore. We want the trust fund unlocked. Today." I looked at my daughter. I looked for a trace of the girl who used to cry when she stepped on a bug. I looked for the girl who used to make me handmade Father's Day cards. I couldn't find her. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger, hollowed out by greed and filled up with Jason's poison. "Is that all?" I asked. "No," Sarah said. "We want the house too. Not this dump. The penthouse. You are going to sign the deed over to us, and you are going to reinstate Jason's standing with the business council. You are going to fix what you broke." I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt stale. "You think I broke it, Sarah?" I asked softly. "You humiliated us," she screamed. "You destroyed us." I nodded. I leaned back in my chair. "Mitch," I said, "show them the file." Mitch stood up. He loomed over the little lawyer like a skyscraper. He didn't hand the file to Miller. He handed it to Sarah. She took it, frowning. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it," Mitch said. Sarah flipped open the cover. She stared at the first document. It wasn't a new legal threat. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was a photocopy of a document signed 5 years ago. I watched her face as she read. I watched the blood drain from her cheeks. I watched her hands start to shake, rattling the paper. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why do you have this?" The lawyer, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, tried to peek over her shoulder. "What is it, Mrs. Sterling? Is it the trust document?" Sarah slammed the folder shut, clutching it to her chest. She looked at me with pure terror. "You promised," she hissed. "You promised you would never bring this up. You said it was buried." "I said it was buried as long as you were my daughter," I said. "But you aren't my daughter anymore, Sarah. You are a litigant. And in court, everything is evidence." "What is she talking about?" Mr. Kowalski, the lawyer, asked, confused. "Tell him, Sarah," I said. Tell your lawyer why you don't have a case. Tell him why you don't have a trust fund." She didn't speak. She couldn't speak. She was hyperventilating. "If she won't tell you, I will," Mitch said, his voice smooth and cold. 5 years ago, before she met Jason, Sarah had a different boyfriend, a guy named Ricky. He was a semi-professional poker player with a bad habit of playing on credit. "Stop it," Sarah begged. "Please stop." Mitch ignored her. Ricky got into debt with the wrong people. $200,000 of debt. When they came to collect, they didn't go to Ricky. They went to Sarah. She didn't have the money, so she borrowed it. Or rather, she embezzled it from the internship program I had set her up with. The lawyer's eyes went wide. He looked at his client. "She was facing felony charges," Mitch continued. "She was facing prison. She came to her father. She begged him to save her." I leaned forward. "I paid the debt, Sarah," I said. "I paid back the company so they wouldn't press charges. I paid off the loan sharks so they wouldn't break your legs. It cost me nearly $250,000. And in exchange," Mitch said, dropping the hammer, "Sarah signed a document. A voluntary, irrevocable waiver of inheritance." The lawyer froze. "Waiver," he squeaked. "Total waiver," Mitch confirmed. In exchange for the bailout, Sarah Kowalski legally surrendered any and all future claims to the Kowalski estate trusts and assets. She agreed that the $250,000 constituted her full and final inheritance paid in advance. Mitch pointed to the folder in Sarah's hands. "It is notarized," Mitch said. "It is filed with the county. It is ironclad. You have no trust fund, Sarah. You have no claim. You spent your inheritance 5 years ago saving a loser boyfriend, and you signed away your birthright to stay out of jail." The silence in the room was suffocating. Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. "Does Jason know?" I asked. Sarah shook her head violently. "No," she whispered. "No, he doesn't know. He thinks I have millions coming. He thinks the trust is just locked. If he finds out you are worth zero," I said, "really zero, not just temporarily cut off, but permanently disinherited, how long do you think he will stay?" Sarah started to cry. It wasn't the angry crying of the hotel. It was the terrified crying of a woman who realizes she has built her life on a trapdoor. "Please don't tell him," she sobbed. "He will leave me. He is all I have." "You had me," I said. "You had a father who loved you enough to clean up your mess and keep your secret for 5 years. I let you live in the penthouse to help you get back on your feet. I funded your life so you could feel normal again. And how did you repay me? You brought another loser into my life. You let him disrespect me. You let him treat me like a servant. And then you came into my house to sue me." I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every one of my 73 years. "I gave you a choice, Sarah," I said. "I gave you a choice between a father and a check. You chose the check. But the joke is on you, honey. You chose a check that you already cashed 5 years ago." I looked at the cheap lawyer. "Mr. Miller," I said, "I suggest you take your client and leave. If you file a suit, I will countersue for the legal fees, and I will enter that waiver into the public record. Jason will read about it in the newspaper." The lawyer grabbed his briefcase. He looked at Sarah with disgust. He realized he wasn't getting a payday. He wasn't getting a percentage of $10 million. He was getting a client with no money and a closet full of skeletons. "Mrs. Sterling," the lawyer said coldly, "I think we are done here. My bill will be in the mail." He walked out. He didn't even hold the door for her. Sarah stood there clutching the folder. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were pleading. She wanted me to fix it. She wanted me to tell her it was a trick. She wanted me to be the dad who made the monsters go away. But I wasn't that dad anymore. I was the chairman, and I had just closed the account. "Get out of my house," I said. "Dad, please," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go. Jason will kill me if he finds out." "Then you better start walking," I said. "And you better come up with a really good lie before you get back to that basement." I walked to the door and held it open. The night air was cold. "Go," I said. She walked past me. She looked like a ghost. She stepped onto the porch and down the stairs. She started walking down the dark street, trailing behind the cheap lawyer who was already getting into his car. I slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain across. I turned back to the room. Mitch was putting the file back into his briefcase. "Did we need to be that hard on her?" Mitch asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "She needed to know that the well is dry. She needed to know that she is alone. It is the only way she will ever wake up." I walked to the window and watched her disappear into the darkness. She was walking back to a man who only loved her for money she didn't have. It was going to be a bloodbath when he found out, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be there to clean up the blood. I turned off the porch light. The house went dark. I was tired. I was old. But I was free. And tomorrow I had a meeting with the police to arrange the final surprise for my son-in-law. Because if I knew Jason Sterling and I did, desperation would make him do something stupid. And I wanted to be ready when he did. Desperation has a specific smell. In my 40 years in the logistics business, I learned to recognize it on the warehouse floor. It smells like sour sweat, stale adrenaline, and bad decisions. It is the smell of a man who has run out of options and is about to do something that cannot be undone. I knew Jason Sterling was desperate. I knew he was broke. I knew his wife had just told him that the $10 million lawsuit was a fantasy because she had signed away her rights 5 years ago. When you back a rat into a corner, it doesn't surrender. It attacks. I knew Jason wouldn't accept defeat. His ego wouldn't allow it. He would convince himself that I was a hoarder. He would convince himself that an old man who doesn't trust banks must keep millions in cash hidden under the floorboards. He would convince himself that stealing from me wasn't a crime but a recovery of assets that rightfully belonged to him. So I set the table for him. On Friday morning, I had Mitch leak a piece of information to a mutual acquaintance, a loose-lipped bartender at the club, where Jason used to buy drinks for everyone. The rumor was simple. Bernie Kowalski was liquidating some assets and heading to his cabin in Wisconsin for a week of off-grid fishing. The house would be empty. The cash from the sale would be in the safe. It was the oldest trick in the book, but Jason wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a drowning man looking for a piece of driftwood. It was 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I wasn't in Wisconsin. I was sitting in a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from my house eating a slice of cherry pie and watching a live video feed on my iPad. The screen showed the back porch of my house in high-definition night vision. The yard was quiet. The swing set stood still in the moonlight. Then a shadow moved near the azalea bushes. I took a sip of coffee. "Here we go." The figure stepped into the light. It was Jason. He was wearing black, a hoodie pulled up over his head, but I would recognize that walk anywhere. It was the entitled strut of a man who thought the world owed him a living, even when he was sneaking through a backyard to commit a felony. He was carrying a duffel bag and a crowbar. He didn't try to pick the lock. He didn't check for an alarm. He went straight to the kitchen window. I watched on the screen as he wedged the crowbar under the frame and heaved. The wood splintered. The glass shattered. It was a violent, clumsy entry. I tapped the screen to switch cameras. The interior view showed the kitchen. Jason climbed through the broken window, knocking over a vase of flowers my wife had bought before she died. He didn't care. He stepped onto the glass, his boots crunching loudly. He pulled a flashlight from his pocket. The beam cut through the darkness, swinging wildly. He wasn't looking for jewelry. He wasn't looking for electronics. He was looking for the motherlode. I watched him move into the living room. He tore the painting off the wall above the fireplace, looking for a wall safe. Nothing but drywall. He kicked the sofa over. He swept the family photos off the mantel, listening to the frames crack against the floor. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a tantrum. He was destroying my home because he couldn't destroy me. I switched the camera view to the master bedroom. This was where the trap was laid. I had installed a safe in the closet floor 3 days ago. It wasn't my real safe. My real assets were in a vault downtown. This was a decoy. A heavy fireproof box bolted to the foundation, designed to look like it held a fortune. Jason kicked the bedroom door open. He swept the flashlight around the room. He rifled through my dresser drawers, throwing my clothes on the floor. Then he went to the closet. He pushed aside my coats and saw it. The safe. Even on the grainy black and white video, I could see his body language change. He dropped to his knees. He caressed the steel door. He thought he had won. He thought he was minutes away from being rich again. He pulled a heavy drill from his duffel bag. He clearly planned to drill out the lock. It was going to be loud. It was going to take time. I picked up my phone. I didn't call 911. I called the direct line of the precinct captain, a man I had played poker with for 15 years. "He is inside, Jack," I said. "Breaking and entering. Burglary. Possession of burglary tools. He is in the master bedroom." "We are moving in, Bernie," Jack said. "The boys are already at the perimeter. We were waiting for him to commit the act." I hung up. I went back to the iPad. Jason was sweating. The drill whined as he bored into the lock mechanism. He was cursing, his face twisted in frustration. It took him 10 minutes to break the tumbler. 10 minutes of hard labor. Probably the most work he had done in his entire life. The lock clicked. The handle turned. Jason threw the door open. He reached inside expecting stacks of $100 bills. He expected gold bars. He expected salvation. He pulled out the only thing inside the safe. It was a single piece of paper. I zoomed in on the feed. I knew exactly what it said because I had typed it myself that morning. Jason held the paper up to his flashlight. I watched his lips move as he read the words. "Welcome to prison, important person." He froze. He stared at the paper. Then he stared at the empty safe. He shoved his hand back inside, feeling around the corners, desperate to find a hidden compartment. There was nothing. Just cold steel and the echo of his own stupidity. He stood up slowly. He looked around the room. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't a heist. It was a stage. And he was the only actor who didn't know the script. He looked directly at the smoke detector on the ceiling, where the hidden camera lens was gleaming. He knew. In that moment, he knew I was watching. "Bernie," he screamed. The sound was tinny through the iPad speakers, but the rage was clear. Then the floodlights outside turned on. The bedroom window turned a blinding white as the police tactical lights hit the glass. "Police, come out with your hands up!" The voice was amplified by a megaphone. It shook the walls of the house. Jason dropped the paper. He dropped the crowbar. He looked for a way out. He ran to the window, but he saw the uniforms in the yard. He ran to the bedroom door, but he heard the heavy boots pounding up the stairs. He was trapped. The rat had nowhere left to run. He retreated to the corner of the room, crouching down between the bed and the wall. He was crying. He was rocking back and forth. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who had played a man's game and lost everything. The bedroom door burst open. 3 officers with drawn weapons stormed in. "Get on the ground, now!" Jason didn't resist. He collapsed face forward onto the carpet. An officer put a knee in his back and wrenched his arms behind him. The handcuffs clicked. It is a mistake, Jason sobbed into the rug. My father-in-law lives here. I was just checking on the house. I have a key. You broke through a window with a crowbar, son, the officer said, hauling him to his feet. That is not checking on the house. That is a felony. They dragged him out of the room. He was still screaming my name. He was screaming for Sarah. He was screaming for a lawyer. I watched until they dragged him out of the frame. Then I watched the empty room for a moment. My clothes were scattered. My photos were broken. My window was smashed. It was a mess. But it was a mess that could be cleaned up. The mess Jason had made of my daughter's life that was harder to fix. But putting him behind bars was a good start. I closed the iPad cover. I finished my cherry pie. It was the best pie I had ever tasted. I paid my bill and left a $20 tip for the waitress. I walked out into the cool night air. I had a meeting with the district attorney in the morning to hand over the security footage. I had a contractor coming at noon to fix the window. And somewhere in the city, in a cold holding cell, Jason Sterling was realizing that he was finally going to meet some very important people, his cellmates. I got into my truck and drove home. The police tape was already up around my yard. My neighbors were on their porches watching the show. I waved to Mrs. Higgins next door. "Everything okay, Bernie?" she called out. "Everything is fine, Martha," I said. "Just caught a pest that has been bothering me for months." I walked up the driveway past the broken glass and into my house. It was quiet. It was empty. But for the first time in a long time, it felt safe. The predator was in a cage, and I was the one holding the key. The fluorescent lights of the criminal courthouse hummed with a low electric buzz, a sound that always reminds me of a dentist's drill. I was sitting in the gallery 3 rows back wearing my navy blue suit, the same suit I had ironed for the wedding that never happened. It fit a little looser now. Stress had taken 10 pounds off my frame, but it had added something else, a hardness, a layer of emotional callus that hadn't been there before. Jason Sterling sat at the defendant's table. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his pale, unshaven face. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught wearing his father's clothes. His high-priced defense attorney, paid for by the last dregs of his mother's savings, was whispering in his ear, but Jason wasn't listening. He was staring at the jury box, his eyes wide and unblinking. The charge was burglary in the first degree, a Class 1 felony, breaking and entering a dwelling with the intent to commit a theft. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the DNA on the crowbar, the confession he had screamed into the rug while the police cuffed him. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. Or rather, he wasn't going down alone. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Reynolds, called Jason to the stand. It was a risky move letting a defendant testify, but Jason had insisted. He thought he could charm the jury. He thought he could spin the narrative one last time. "Mr. Sterling," Ms. Reynolds asked, "did you break into Mr. Kowalski's home on the night of November 12th? Jason gripped the railing of the witness stand. "I entered the home, yes," Jason said, "but I didn't break in. I had implied consent." "Implied consent?" Ms. Reynolds repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You used a crowbar on a window. I was retrieving property that belonged to my wife," Jason said quickly. "Property that her father was withholding illegally. We were in a domestic dispute. I was trying to recover assets to support my family. And did your wife, Sarah Kowalski, instruct you to do this?" The courtroom went silent. I looked over at the bench where Sarah was sitting. She was alone. She was wearing a simple gray dress. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been walking through a desert for months. She looked at Jason. Her eyes were filled with a desperate hope. She was praying he would protect her. She was praying he would take the fall like a man. Jason looked at her too. For a second I saw a flicker of hesitation. But then self-preservation kicked in. The rat saw a way out of the maze. "Yes," Jason said. His voice was loud and clear. Sarah told me to do it. She told me where the safe was. She told me her father kept cash in the house. She said it was our money. She said if I didn't get it, she would leave me. Sarah gasped. The sound echoed in the quiet room. She put a hand over her mouth. Tears started to stream down her face. She pressured me. Jason continued warming up to the lie. She was hysterical. She was screaming about her inheritance. She said her father was stealing her birthright. I only went there because I was afraid of what she might do to herself if I didn't. I was trying to save her. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. He was throwing her under the bus to shave a few years off his sentence. He was painting himself as the victim of a manipulative wife. The gallery murmured. The jurors scribbled in their notebooks. Sarah slumped in her seat, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The man she had defended against her own father, the man she had chosen over her own blood, was selling her out for a plea deal. I felt a surge of rage, but I kept my face impassive. I knew the truth. I knew Sarah hadn't known about the break-in. She was greedy, yes. She was entitled, yes. But she wasn't a burglar. Jason had acted alone, driven by his own ego. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand slowly. I swore on the Bible. I looked at the jury. I looked at the judge. Mr. Kowalski, the defense attorney, asked, "Isn't it true that you had a contentious relationship with the defendant, that you resented him for marrying your daughter?" I looked at Jason. He was smirking slightly, thinking his lawyer was scoring points. "I didn't resent him," I said calmly. "I pitied him." "Pitied him," the lawyer scoffed. "A successful young entrepreneur. A fraud," I corrected. "A man who built a life on lies. A man who stole from his own investors. A man who couldn't pay for his own wedding." "Objection," the lawyer shouted. "Overruled," the judge said. I leaned forward. I looked directly at Jason. "You said you only wanted important people, Jason," I said. "You told me that to my face. You judged me by my truck and my clothes. You thought you were better than me because you knew how to order wine and I knew how to change oil." Jason looked away. He couldn't hold my gaze. "Well, look where we are now," I continued. "You are sitting in a jumpsuit that belongs to the state. You are about to go to a place where your startup valuation doesn't matter, where your leased Porsche doesn't matter." I paused. The courtroom was dead silent. "In prison, Jason," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble, "you are going to be very important. You are going to be the most important person in the cell block. Because in there, a man with soft hands and a big mouth is a commodity. You are finally going to get the attention you always craved." Jason turned pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. The defense lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the truth. They saw a weak, vindictive man who had bitten the hand that fed him and then tried to blame his wife for his own crimes. The deliberations lasted 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase was brief. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had clearly seen enough of Jason's antics, didn't hesitate. "Jason Sterling," she said, "for the crimes of burglary, grand larceny, and criminal trespass, I sentence you to 5 years in the state penitentiary." 5 years. Jason let out a strangled cry. He looked at his lawyer. He looked at the gallery. He looked at Sarah. Sarah didn't look back. She was staring at the floor, tears dripping onto her lap. She didn't stand up. She didn't scream. She just sat there, frozen, in the realization that her life had been burned to the ground by the man she loved. The bailiff moved in. He handcuffed Jason. The click of the metal was final. As they led him away, Jason turned to me one last time. "Bernie," he shouted. "Bernie, help me, please." I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I watched him disappear through the side door, dragging his feet. A man who had finally run out of runway. The courtroom began to empty. People filed out whispering. I stayed in my seat. I waited. Finally, only 2 people were left. Me and Sarah. She sat 3 rows ahead of me. She hadn't moved. She looked small in the empty room. I stood up. I walked down the aisle. I stopped at the end of her row. She looked up. Her face was ravaged by grief and betrayal. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and longing. "Dad," she whispered. I looked at her. I saw the daughter I had loved. I saw the pain in her eyes. But I also saw the waiver she had signed. I saw the years of disrespect. I saw the choice she had made on the street outside the hotel. I stood there for a long moment. The air was thick with things unsaid. "You aren't going to jail, Sarah," I said quietly. "I told the DA not to press charges against you. I told them you didn't know." She let out a sob, a sound of relief and agony. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you, Dad. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Jason, he lied about everything." "I know," I said. Can I come home?" she asked. Her voice was small, like a child asking for water in the middle of the night. I looked at the exit sign above the door. It was glowing red. "No, Sarah," I said. She flinched as if I had slapped her. "But you saved me," she said. "You kept me out of jail." "I saved you from prison," I said. "I didn't save you from the consequences of your life. You chose him. You defended him. You sued me for him. But he betrayed me," she cried. "You heard him, he blamed me, and you stayed with him until the handcuffs went on," I said. "You didn't leave him because he was a crook. You left him because he got caught." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a check. It wasn't for $10 million. It wasn't for $100,000. It was for $5,000. Enough for a deposit on an apartment and a month of food. I placed the check on the bench next to her. "This is it, Sarah," I said. "This is the last penny you will ever see from me. Use it to start over. Use it to buy a bus ticket. I don't care. But don't come to my house. Don't call my number." "Dad, please," she begged, reaching for my hand. "I am your daughter." "You were my daughter," I said, pulling my hand away. "Now you are just a woman who learned a very expensive lesson." I turned and walked away. I walked down the aisle past the empty jury box, past the judge's bench. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the hallway. I didn't look back. I knew she was crying. I knew she was alone. But I also knew that if I turned around, if I saved her one more time, she would never learn to stand on her own 2 feet. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled of exhaust and hot pavement. It smelled like freedom. I had cut the cord. I had amputated the limb to save the body. It hurt. It hurt like hell. But the infection was gone. I walked to my truck. I got in. I started the engine. I had a business to run. I had a life to live. And for the first time in years, it was a life that belonged only to me. The water on Lake Geneva was smooth as a mirror reflecting the gray Wisconsin sky. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, a year to the day since the wedding that never happened. I sat on the end of the dock at my private lodge, a property I had bought cash 3 months ago because it had no cell service and the nearest neighbor was a mile away. I had a line in the water. I had a thermos of coffee. I had peace. I heard the gravel crunch on the driveway behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew the footsteps. It was Mitch. He was the only person who had the gate code. He walked down the wooden planks of the dock, his boots heavy and slow. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking out at the mist rising off the water. "You didn't come here to fish, Mitch," I said. keeping my eyes on the red bobber floating 20 feet out. "No," Mitch said. His voice was quiet. "I came because there is someone at the perimeter gate, Bernie." I tightened my grip on the rod. I didn't ask who. I knew. "She has been there for an hour," Mitch continued. "She didn't buzz the intercom. She didn't try to climb the fence. She is just standing there. She drove a beat-up Honda Civic that sounds like it is dying." I reeled in a few inches of line. The mechanical clicking of the reel was the only sound in the world. "What is she doing?" I asked. "She is just looking at the house," Mitch said. "She is wearing a waitress uniform from a diner in Madison. She looks tired, Bernie. She looks 10 years older than she did in that courtroom. She looks like she knows what winter feels like." I finally turned around. I picked up the binoculars I kept on the bench for watching eagles. I lifted them to my eyes and focused on the gate at the top of the hill, 300 yards away. There she was. Sarah. She was leaning against the rusted hood of a car that had clearly been in a few accidents. She was wearing a pink uniform with a white apron stained with coffee. Her hair wasn't done up in a salon blowout. It was pulled back in a messy bun, gray strands visible at the temples. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her face was thin, the cheekbones sharp, the eyes hollow. She looked like a woman who worked double shifts on her feet and counted tips to pay the electric bill. She wasn't looking at the lake. She was looking down the driveway toward the dock. She couldn't see me clearly, not at this distance, but she knew I was there. She didn't look angry. She didn't look entitled. She looked humbled. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side with nothing but scars. Mitch shifted his weight. "She handed a letter to the guard," Mitch said. "She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask to come in. She just asked if you were happy." He held out a white envelope. It was sealed. "Do you want to read it?" Mitch asked. "Do you want to invite her down?" "She is alone, Bernie. Jason is in cell block C. She divorced him 6 months ago. She is doing it on her own now. Maybe she learned the lesson." I looked at the envelope. I looked at the woman standing by the gate. I felt the pull of biology. I felt the ghost of the father I used to be, the one who wanted to fix everything. The one who wanted to make the pain go away. But then I remembered the courtroom. I remembered the waiver. I remembered the look on her face when she told me I was cruel for not giving her millions she hadn't earned. I lowered the binoculars. I didn't take the letter. "No, Mitch," I said. Mitch paused. He looked at me with a question in his eyes. "Bernie, she is your daughter," he said softly. I turned back to the water. The mist was clearing. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. "My daughter died in a hotel lobby in Chicago," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. "My daughter died the moment she chose a fraud over her father. My daughter died when she tried to sue me for the sweat off my back." I cast the line out again. It hit the water with a soft plop. "That woman up there," I said, pointing with my chin without looking back. "She is a stranger. She is a stranger who learned a very expensive lesson about value. She is a stranger who finally understands that actions have consequences that cannot be fixed with a check." "But is it forgiveness?" Mitch asked. "It isn't about forgiveness," I said. "It is about reality. If I invite her down here, if I open that gate, I undo the lesson. I become the safety net again, and she needs to learn how to fly without a net. She is surviving, Mitch. She is working. She is standing on her own 2 feet. That is the greatest gift I could ever give her. Tell the guard to give her the letter back," I said. "Tell him to tell her that I am fishing, and tell him to wish her good luck." Mitch stood there for a moment longer. He understood. He nodded once, turned, and walked back up the hill. I watched through the binoculars one last time. I saw Mitch talk to the guard. I saw the guard hand the letter back to Sarah. She took it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just nodded. She looked down at the dock one last time. She placed her hand on her heart for a second, a small, silent gesture. Then she got into her rusted car. The engine coughed, then caught. She drove away, disappearing over the ridge. I put the binoculars down. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. I was alone. I had no heirs. I had no legacy but the money in the bank and the peace in my soul. And then the rod tip jerked violently. The line went tight. The reel screamed as something massive took the bait and ran for the deep water. I stood up. I braced my feet against the wood of the dock. I set the hook with a sharp, powerful motion. I had a fish on, a big one. It was going to be a hell of a fight. And as I battled the creature in the deep, cold water, feeling the raw power of life on the other end of the line, I didn't feel lonely. I felt alive. I felt free. The wind blew across the lake, cold and biting, but it felt good on my face. The past was gone. The ledger was balanced. And the future was whatever I decided to catch. I spent 40 years in logistics, but the hardest thing I ever had to deliver was the truth to my own daughter. I used to believe that providing a financial safety net was the ultimate act of parental love, but I learned that for some people, a safety net is nothing more than a hammock. You cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot finance character. If you allow people to treat you like an ATM, do not be surprised when they kick you the moment the transaction is declined. True value isn't found in a bank account or a VIP guest list. It is found in the people who stand by you when you are driving an old truck, not just when you are signing the checks. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is close the wallet and open the door to reality. If you believe that respect must be earned and never bought, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice is finally served.